Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing very well.
Yeah.
We want to spend some time this morning, today on Korea because of things going on there. It never ends, but there might be a little bit of good news there. But before I do that, I want to just update the audience with some of the news that is obviously very important for the European Union and what's going on economically. So there is a bit of excitement. It has to do with Italy. Italy has off and on been on their last legs many times, but they are in trouble. I don't think they like to be in the euro and getting dictates from other countries. I don't think they like NATO telling them what to do or the IMF. But obviously they're in financial trouble. And last night there was an awful lot of excitement because they're fighting over an election or popular appeal to the populace in opposition to those in charge. And this has caused havoc with their bonds and interest rates. And it hasn't just remained with Italy. There's nobody that stands alone in Europe. So because Europe is a mess, it's back to the argument of the euro. It reminds me of the big thing going on before Britain, got out of the euro, and this is coming up. So the markets are very rocky. They're affecting our market. Last time I looked, the stock market, the Dow was down 375, and even though gold didn't skyrocket, all other currencies actually were selling off and going to the dollar because in spite of the dollar's problems, the dollar's better than most of the other. But gold has held its own and has been up. So it is acting as a haven. But there's lots going on there, and we won't go into too much detail on right now, but it is big in the news. It's affecting our markets because we have investments over there, and the banks are hurt, and oil is hurt, and also it's in combination with how we have gotten involved with breaking the agreement with Iran because the Europeans like that agreement. So you add all that up, and it's chaos. But the most important reason why there's chaos is all of the debt that exists and the fundamentals are off base, all the malinvestment that occurs, and there has to be corrections. So all it waits for is an excuse to do that. And right now, that is the excuse. And we'll probably talk on this later on as well because it's going to be around a while. We'll see if Italy drops out.
It's fascinating because it's an economic crisis, as you mentioned, but it's also a really significant political crisis because you had recent elections that were won by a left-right populist coalition, the Five Star Movement on the left and the Northern League on the right. They were able to form a majority government, and then they sent their list of ministers to the president. The president holds only a symbolic office. He only approves that which the people have voted for. And they sent an economics minister who was a Eurosceptic as their choice, reflecting the will of the people. And the president said, no, you can't have him. And so it really has led to a political crisis, and it reaffirms really all of the arguments that the populists have made in Italy, which is, hey, Italians, your votes don't count.
Yeah, I think they're trying to correct it, and obviously the big problem is the economic system of Keynesianism and debt and fiat money. So it'll have to be resolved, so I'm sure we'll be talking about that again. But on Korea, we have a picture I want to start off with because I think the old saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words is pretty true. There we have a picture of Un and Moon, South Korean and North Korean leaders. And it doesn't look like they're getting ready to go to war. I mean, it looks like they're pretty good diplomats, and it looks like, why don't we listen to them? Why don't we let Korea be Korea? And they've, they had a meeting a couple months ago, and they agreed denuclearization of the peninsula, and also signed a peace treaty. Let's get this behind us. Remember, it was the United Nations that really pushed the United States into that war, and we've been over there, and technically the war's still going on. But I think what we see here is the reflection probably of the people. If both of them thought that they're going to be run out of office because of their friendliness with the opposition, it would be impossible to believe that, because I think they've worked hard and continue to work hard, and that this situation is sometimes made bad by the outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
We have the United States lining up against China, which happened very early on in 1950. But I think conditions have changed, and I saw the first breakthrough here from the South Korean people that I could visualize. And that is, they have often wanted to go to North Korea and visit their relatives. Mm-hmm. And then they elected Moon, who was sympathetic to their views.
Yes.
And then the Olympics, the breakthrough there, and then sister came down there, and she was a delight, and it was really a breakthrough. And then, the others chime in and say, oh, look what we're going to do. Maybe we can bring about peace. Peace will come when this picture lives up to its reality, and the others get out of the way. And it hasn't been too long ago when I made a suggestion. Somebody said, well, what would you do? Well, how would you handle it? And I would say, just let the North talk to the South, and let them work it out, and then inform China and inform the United States. Of course, that isn't the way the world works, and they have to realize that. There's too many special interests. But I just think it's a delightful picture, and I think that that's what people should remember, and that it's not impossible to let diplomacy work. It's just too bad that that wasn't permitted a long time ago, and our government was very adamantly opposed, to any overtures. And, even a couple of weeks ago, they still had war games there, practicing how we were going to invade and take over all North Korean militarily. So we haven't given enough. We haven't given away, as if we have to practice World War II type war games in order to maintain our power, when power is much different. But anyway, I think that is a great picture. I think that they should be leading the charge. And if there are Johnny-come-latelys and say that, this is good and take credit for it, fine and dandy, as long as they move in this direction. But this should have been done a long time ago.
Well, the picture is compelling, and the backstory is, I think, equally compelling, because the timeline here is important. We had the Olympics, which I think were the first breakthrough, and then there's a lot of chatter, and then all of a sudden you saw Trump and Kim discussing a summit meeting, planning a summit. This was going to be Trump's singular achievement. He was going to show how it's done. And then the neocons, particularly John Bolton and the Vice President Pence, were talking about the Libya option over and over again. This is where Libya gave up its nukes, then it got invaded and their leader got killed. So that's not an attractive thing. It's a surprise, surprise. They weren't happy about it, and they said, hey, Pence is acting like a dummy by saying this. And so Trump got upset and canceled it on Friday. This is where it's compelling, though. What happened when he canceled it? The world didn't end. They didn't start rattling sabers. Simply the North and South Korean leaders called each other and said, let's get together and talk this out.
They were the adults in the room.
Yeah.
And it's going to be followed up now. It's acknowledged by our administration that the Vice Chairman Klo is from North Korea, is going to New York and assuming meet with Pompeo, and getting the stage set for following up on the meeting that got canceled all of a sudden. So that I think is good too. But who knows? I don't know. We when we were looking for blame on canceling that meeting, we looked toward the recent appointment of John Bolton, because he never wanted it and despises this movement. He probably still does. But in this day and age, a week of not hearing from somebody is almost like you've been excommunicated. And we haven't heard too much from him, but wonder if there's a little contest going on with a Pompeo that becoming more realistic versus a John Bolton who doesn't seem to be realistic ever.
And that's the real movement. You're right. The U.S. is sending some diplomats to North Korea to help plan this out better. Kim Young-chol, who you mentioned, he was the former head of intelligence for North Korea. Now he's the vice chairman of the party. But now he's heading to New York to potentially to meet with Pompeo, who he met with when Pompeo was in North Korea. So now things are actually being set in motion in earnest after this embrace, after this meeting, after they showed what could happen. And as you suggest, I did a little Google search before we started, John Bolton with the parameter of the last 3 days. There's no John Bolton's name coming up. He's essentially disappeared. I don't know if it's significant or not. Maybe President Trump has put a leash on it, but he certainly tried to make his own boss look bad, in my opinion.
Well, denuclearization is very important. If I had my personal way, there would be no nukes in the world, and the world would be better off. That's not going to happen. There are a lot of nukes out there. But if we waited till the countries that have nuclear power until we agree on denuclearization, why don't we denuclearize the Middle East?
Yeah.
That would probably be helpful. There'd be less threats and intimidation. What about dealing with China? What about dealing with Russia? And even Pakistan, they have it. India. So the weapons are very important. The worse the individuals are, the more danger there is. But it's the people you have to deal with. If all of a sudden, for some reason, Canada thought, well, we don't know where the United States is going to be, but we want a little extra protection, we're going to have a nuclear weapon. You know, if our relationship has remained the same, we're not going to worry about it, even though there'd be no reason for them to have it. But I think that when you set the goal of denuclearization and say, well, we're not going to do a thing until we can inspect every inch of ground in your country and find out that you don't even have a piece of paper that implies that you'd like to build something, you know, that is missing the whole point. I think the image that we were looking at is the image that people should think about, and I will get criticized for this because I'm unrealistic. You know, they're getting along, but that isn't the way it really works. I mean, these are our bitter enemies, and you have to realize that you can't ever give an inch to a country like Iran or any other place. And yet, I think it goes to me in a little way back to the gun issue here. It's not the guns that kill; it's the people that kill, and it's not the weapons that causes wars. It's the politicians and the governments that cause the war. So there's a big difference between that. Even though I wouldn't want somebody to think, well, he will just unilaterally disarm and not pay any attention. But I think this obsession with spending 30 or 40 years on trying to keep somebody from getting a nuclear weapon or pretending that they have it, and they never even have one, and yet continue to say that we have to treat them as if they want one and might get one, and do that for decades, and that's just a cover for trying to remain antagonistic and enemies with those people, so that the American people will say, yeah, they're dangerous. We got to do it. Saddam Hussein, he was on his way over here and he was going to nuke us all. And it's more propaganda that they use. So we should have a little bit of more moderation in their language.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think what the neocons were doing was trying to construct kind of a straw man, in a sense, for our negotiating position with North Korea, which is that we need immediate denuclearization. Tell us where we back up the trucks. We're going to load your nukes. We're going to take them back to the U.S. Maybe we'll give you some money later on. That was their position. They wanted to stake out the extremist territory. And I saw a piece in the New York Times today from the former director of the Los Alamos lab, and he and a couple of his colleagues wrote a paper. They're the only ones that have seen the facilities in North Korea, so they're very familiar with the facilities, and they have written that this denuclearization process could take 10, 12 or more years because of the complexity of what they have built there. This isn't something where you turn the key, pull up the truck, and take away the nukes. So the question is whether this idea of a phased process is allowed to proceed through negotiations. That would mean sidelining Pence, sidelining Bolton, sidelining the others. And I think, we always look for a bright spot and a little bit of hope. I think Trump may have given us a little bit of an indication. I hesitate to be too optimistic, but he openly contradicted Bolton several times with tweets over the weekend suggesting that a phased denuclearization process may be acceptable to the U.S., telling Bolton and the neocons step back.
And the other thing that would be so much help would be, a peace treaty, the DMZ virtually obliterated, and families coming together again, and the North Koreans being introduced, even with South Korea's shortcomings in politics, they did have more freedom, and they do have more prosperity, and North Koreans might say, well, we might like to enjoy this. So it's the hardliner in North Korea. They believe in their system like they believe in a religion, and they don't want that to happen. And there's some neocons that don't want to happen because their position is like a religion too, and they don't want that to happen. But this whole thing is so artificial that they have divided this country, and they're all Koreans, and if they saw themselves as one people, then I think this denuclearization would be, become less of an issue, because the South would feel less threatened, and the North should feel less threatened. And besides, they might want to spend their money on more for helping the standard of living.
Yeah, than for weapons. It's interesting. There are a couple of other tricky issues that this gentleman in the New York Times pointed out. Where to draw the line between civilian and military nuclear facilities. See, they do generate nuclear power that they use, and their missile program in North Korea, dividing between nuclear-capable missiles. And I was thinking as I was reading this, it's kind of interesting because this is a lot of what we're talking about with the Iran deal. Now, wouldn't it be ironic if President Trump found himself directly in former President Obama's shoes, arranging and negotiating a deal with North Korea that in many ways is mirroring the deal that Obama created with Iran? It would
I don't know. I'm sorry you brought that up, because you know how politics work on my load.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Shut
I don't want to support something that Obama said. But that is one of the problems, and I think that's one of the reasons why we get more credibility, because we're looking purely at the issues, and just because Obama said something, that we have to reject it. So it is, and even though I make the point all the time that there's no real bipartisanship, but there's big struggles within the confines for power, and that's doesn't deal with parties, but the two parties, on policies, they support each other. So it would be much better if we just looked at the issues. And I think that's why we were making an attempt that if a Democrat has an accident and does something right, we should praise them. Yeah. But what if the accident happens on the Republican side? Then we should praise them. And maybe they'll come up with an issue of free trade or low tariffs and a few things like that.
By accident. Well, I guess my conclusion, if we're there already, is really about Kim Yong-chol in a way. I mean, this is a guy who was personally on the U.S. sanctions list twice, forbidden from entering the U.S. because of all this sanctions nonsense. And here it turns out he may be a key to peace in the North between the North and South and the U.S. So what does this tell you about the utility of sanctioning everything that moves, trying to put pressure? It's a foolish thing. The other thing that I would mention is, again, remind you that we are having a Ron Paul Institute annual conference in Washington, D.C. on August 18th. Tickets are going to go on sale very soon. I'm hoping by the end of today. We've just had a couple of exciting new speakers sign up, and I'm going to let everyone know about that. But in the meantime, sign up for our updates. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org and hit subscribe, and so we can send you our regular updates about a number of things, but particularly things like our conferences, keep you up to date. Your information is private and secure with us. It goes nowhere else, and we don't bombard you with spam. We're very, very conservative in what we send out, just the stuff that you need to know very infrequently, once a week at most. So do sign up. We'll keep you posted to the conference. Look forward to seeing you in August.
And Daniel, I don't think we have to worry about the issues disappearing. I think the contest between interventionism and non-interventionism, it's going to be around for a while. And some people ask, well, why do you work so hard if you don't think you're making progress? Well, I happen to think we do make progress. I think now that people have learned the difference between isolationism and non-interventionism, because the one thing is, non-interventionism, along with a libertarian economic policy, is anything but isolation, because we want to talk with people, we want to trade with people, and that's the reason that you're less likely to have wars. And this is the reason that I am always keeping my fingers crossed and hopeful that the fact that Russia right now trades a lot with the Europeans, that this effort to perpetuate this antagonism toward Russia will finally quit. But here we're already talking about we need more troops in Europe because we have to know how we're going to, contest the Russians. The Russians are coming, and actually they're cutting back on their military expenditures. But there are people who are really bugging to send more troops there. Then if we don't do it, then of course they'll accuse us of being un-American and not supporting the troops. So I think that issue is still out there. It's going to remain. It'll probably remain throughout all of history. But I am convinced that it's a plausible argument. It's worth working for, and the less intervention we have, the more likely we are to have peace. Why should people argue about peace and prosperity if you have a set of ideas that would promote that? Those are our goals that we have here at this channel, and I am so delighted that we have a lot of supporters that support these ideas. Please come back soon to the Liberty Report.